Hey everyone, welcome back to the FPS series. In the last few episodes, we gave the weapon idle sway, look sway, and strafe tilt. Today we're going to be finishing that set with a weapon bob. It's that figure eight that the gun does while you walk or run. We're going to connect it to the player's speed and also connect it to the rhythm that we already created for our camera head bob. And you see that it's pretty subtle, but we're going to make it so the weapon uses that same timing, that same step pace. So let's get this set up. The first thing we need to do is get into the camera effects. This is where a lot of our logic is currently, and it's where we're doing our step timer for our head bob. So currently that step timer is driving that camera movement when we are walking or running. And in order to do that, we're going to create a quick function here as a getter. We're just going to get this value, and we're going to add a func get bob phase. This is going to return a float, and that float is going to be our step timer. So we're going to put that into this script so we can then call this from within our weapon controller. Now you could just redo that step timer logic within the weapon controller, but then you're repeating yourself and those might get out of phase. So we're just going to use the same single point of truth from our camera, and we're going to use that within the weapon. So let's go into our weapon setup. That is within our weapon controller script. And we're going to add another reference here. We already have a reference to the camera 3D. We're going to adjust this a little bit just to make it a little bit more type safe. We're currently asking for a camera 3D. That is where our camera effects currently sits. Let's adjust this so it only reaches for the camera effects, and we'll make sure that that is still connected. It is. That's just a little bit more type safe, and we'll get the benefit of having that class when we type things out. Now we need to add a new export group. We're adding a new effect, so we're going to add a new export group. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So export group. This is going to be for our weapon bob, and within this, we're going to have an export for our weapon bob, whether or not we want to have this turned on. We'll hit it to true. And then another for our bob amplitude. This will be a vector 2. And let's do a default of 0.02. And we totally mistyped that. There we go. So the amplitude is basically going to create a figure 8 effect. And that figure 8 is going to move kind of like this. And that amplitude is telling us, how high that will be and how wide that will be. So the X value is that width and the Y value is the height. Then after that, we're going to use a bob max speed. And this is the horizontal speed at which the bob is going to reach its full amplitude. That's connected to the player's speed here. We have a default speed of 7 and the sprint of 3. We'll set this to 10 just in case we get a speed burst. We don't want to go above that. We're just kind of like clamping that movement. And then we're going to add a bob stiffness because we're going to be using our springies. I cannot spell. There we go. I have one of those mechanical keyboards and I find that I actually make more mistakes. So maybe I need to look into that. All right, so we have our stiffness. We need our damping to finish out the spring info that we need. And like we did for the idle sway, because this is a very similar type of setup, we're going to add, in fact, let's just add it right under here let's just add it right under here for weapon bob. So we need to save these values. We need to save an X, a Y, and then the velocity for both of those. That's connected to the spring. We've talked about that in a previous episode. So we have bob X. This is a float. 0, bob Y. And while I'm sitting here typing all this stuff, if the typing out is just boring and you think it would be better if I didn't just manually type things out, let me know in the comments because we can adjust this. I can just paste what we're going to talk about and then go through it line by line. Kind of makes for a quicker video, but also the pacing might be off. Anyway, let me know about that. So we have the X and Y, and then we have the velocity for the X and Y. That is for our spring setup. All right, so we have all of those in there. Let's build the bobbing part. This is the fun part. So we have all of our updates here. We have update idle sway, look sway, strafe tilt, and then we're applying those offsets. Let's add it underneath our updates here. We're gonna add a new function. This is gonna be update bob. We're gonna get our delta value in here, and we're gonna pass through and return a vector 3. So what this is going to do is it's going to read that phasing, that camera step timer that we talked about. We're going to get that. We're going to turn that into a figure 8 pattern. We're going to scale that by how fast we're moving, and then we're going to run it through a spring so it eases in and out that we've done before. We've done a very similar pattern for that for the idle sway, and we're just going to add that movement on top of the other movement that we've already done. So update Bob. First, we're going to check if the current weapon model, so if we don't have that, or if we don't have the camera, or we don't have the player, these are all just null checks, then let's just return 0. Okay, we'll just make sure we're not doing any movement here. So we need to create a phase, and we're going to get that from that function that we just created. So get Bob phase. I am totally mistyping this again. There we go, weapon model. It's unhappy. Let's just do a return so we don't get red everywhere. All right, so we're getting that step timer, that phase. All right, now we're getting our speed from our player. So our player's velocity X and our player velocity Z, and we get the length of that. So that gives us our speed based on the horizontal movement of the player. We're going to set our target where we want to go, our X here. I want to set that to 0. We'll do the same for our Y because we're moving on those axes. I like it better when it looks like that. Set those to 0. And then we want to check because we want to make sure that, one, we don't do any head bobbing when we're not moving, and we need to determine how fast we need to move in order to start doing that. So if our speed, that is that length that we just got, if it's greater than 0.1, then let's do our head bob. So we'll get a speed factor. We're going to clamp this. This is our speed divided by bob max speed. Clamp that between 0 and 1. That's just getting that alpha value for our speed there. So if we're not moving at all, we're at 0. If we are moving our full speed, that full 10, that means we're running, we're using our sprint key, then we're going to get 1 for that. And then we're going to get our figure 8 movement, okay? So we can do that by taking our phase and multiplying by tau. Tau is a full circle. So as we go from 0 to 1, we're going to do that full rotation, that circumference of a circle. And by having that, we can now use our angle that we're getting to get our target X and our target Y. And then we're just going to do some sine. This is something that's been done for many an FPS games using the sine values to get that figure 8 pattern. So we'll multiply our X. We're getting the sine of angle, multiplying that by our amplitude for our X, and then the speed factor. That's going to make that bigger when we move faster. Our target Y, again, sine angle. In this case, we're going to multiply by 2. We don't want it to be exactly the same as the target X because that phasing will just create a diagonal movement. So we multiply that by 2 to quicken it. And then we again multiply by our amplitude Y and then our speed factor. Okay, now those target X and Y, those are also going to be used for our spring. So I'm just going to copy this in here because we have talked about this before. We're just using this target where we want to go and then getting a result, running it through our spring utility that we've done a couple of times here. So we have this for the X and the Y, and then we need to return all of this now that we have our final values. And this is going to be a vector 3. This is our bob X and our bob Y, which are equaling our result X and result Y. And we will save that, and that will be our update Bob. And again, this is only going to run when we are moving above 0.1. All right, so we have this. Let's add this into our weapon offsets. This will be the same pattern that we've done for our idle offset and look offset. We're going to add another one here for our bob offset. We're going to take our update Bob, run through with delta. If we're doing weapon Bob, else we'll pass along our vector 3, 0, same pattern that we've been doing. And then we need to add this then to our model position. Oop, not Bob offset. There we go. That should give us our Bob offset. And one more thing, because if we switch our weapon, we need to reset that offset. We don't want to keep that same offset. We'll just start back at 0. So when we spawn our weapon model, after we store our base position, we're going to reset Bob. So we can do that by doing our Bob X, set it back to 0, Bob Y, set it back to 0, and the same for our Bob X, Y velocities. So that equals 0 and Bob Y, and that equals 0. So we reset that if we are spawning a new weapon or switching our new weapon. All right, now with that, we should be able to check. If you go to your weapon controller, we should have some new options here. For our weapon Bob, we can turn it off and on. We can adjust the amplitude, max speed, stiffness, and damping. Let's test this out. So let's play, and we have our idle sway here. And if we start walking, there's our weapon bob. Now it goes if we're doing sideways, forward, and if we run, it should move faster. And again, you can adjust that to the amplitude, how much you want it to do over here. Let's just like make it crazy and play that again. All right, a little herky-jerky movement here. Hard to aim when you're moving like that. So you can set it back down to the defaults there. You get a nice slight bobbing movement. It's in time with the camera movement, which kind of helps with that. And we got a pretty good looking weapon system now in terms of our procedural animation. We might need a recoil because right now we are just shooting magically to nothing. So I think that would be a good next episode. Maybe we'll do that for episode 22. You can grab these files as always on my Patreon. I have all of the files for the entire FPS series for each episode. You can grab at a specific place if you want to. We're going to keep making these. And yeah, we're starting to get something looking like an FPS game here. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.